first off, I'd like to start off. My name is the only one here, but I'm not the only one that worked on this paper. I'd also like to mention my fellow Viceroy scholars, Matthew Chow and, oh my goodness, this is embarrassing. It's been a month since I've seen them. Matthew and Ken, thank you.
This is being recorded and broadcast right now, live stream.
So hopefully they don't see it. Hopefully Ken doesn't see this. But Ken Teo as well for taking part of this, along with working with Dr. Ear and of course Dr. Shi as well. And so in this paper, Characterizing Caldera's cyber attack emulation capabilities. So before we get into what exactly Caldera is and why we're characterizing it, the first question is why? Why are we doing this? So as Sherman discussed in his presentation, and in a presentation actually last year at HammerCon, we talk about cyber attack flows, where we go through and we try and characterize these attacks and these attackers, and what they're doing, what techniques they have, and what procedures that they're using. And so a question that came from that, from last year especially, is now that we know how the attackers work, we can characterize the attackers themselves, the techniques, and what sort of code and procedures that they're using, how can we replicate that? Well, we can do it manually, of course. We can go through our reports and have a person act as that red team, act as that attacker. But we wanted to see if there was any tools out there where we could emulate that could audit, where we could put in our descriptions, our characteristics of these attackers, and have a piece of software and application to be that red team for us, which led us to Caldera. So what exactly is Caldera? Caldera is a software developed by MITRE that is the state-of-the-art practice for automating cyber attack emulation. And so this was our best option that we've found for emulating these attackers. And so it comes with a wide range of these attack capabilities, and also the logic that it uses in order to sequence these abilities together. And so here is an example of Caldera's architecture. This is a lot, so I like to provide an analogy comparing it to baking a cake. So Caldera is this huge database of all these abilities, or in baking a cake, ingredients. And what Caldera does is it takes those ingredients and it comes up with a recipe. You provide it with a recipe that it uses, and it makes the cake itself. And so at a more technical level, Caldera takes these abilities that it has and the descriptions of how these attackers work, the sequence of events that these attackers go through. And it places each of these abilities in that sequence and is able to launch that attack against a victim machine due to an agent that will be already placed on that victim machine. As a result of this, it can take the information that comes back, the output from those abilities, in order to execute new abilities. So for example, it is able to look for passwords on a victim machine. When it receives those passwords back, it can use those passwords to then attempt to log in as an elevated user automatically. And then at the end of all this, it also provides a debrief report at the end that can be used to show exactly what worked, what didn't work, and give the overall picture for both the operator and whoever they need to present to. So overall, Caldera's abilities cover a numerous amount of different technical applications. And so what we did is we took these around 2,000 different abilities and we mapped them to MITRE's attack framework. We did this to kind of categorize what exactly these abilities do, find a way to put them into categories and see perhaps what Caldera is better at and what Caldera is not so good at. And so we find that overall, most of these abilities that Caldera has falls under defense evasion. And then the second amount falls around discovery. So this has to do a lot with enumerating the machines for information and then removing those logs and that information afterwards. So for our first set of insights, this led us to learning that Caldera, one of its big weaknesses has to do with pivoting, lateral movement, and initial access in the systems. So this is partially due to the need to manually plant an agent on the victim machine for Caldera to use. So in order for Caldera to work at all, the operator that is using Caldera has to plant the agent itself. So Caldera has no option to give it an IP, for example, give it a target, and say, here, go attack this. You have to manually place that on there. However, it is very good at taking all that data off of that system and compiling that data in a very nice report. And so while it lacks that initial access, once it's on a machine, once the agent has been planted manually, its abilities allow it to go through, collect a lot of different sensitive data using various techniques, cover up its tracks by deleting logs and editing registries, and then reporting back all that data to the user. So in conclusion, we find that Caldera, while with its strengths and weaknesses, is very good in controlled environments. And so we find that for those certain sections that it's really good at, implementing it and using it for those segments. But while it's not so good at initial access, avoiding those situations where that's used and using it just for what it's good at. So we find it can be effective, especially for education and research, whether it be giving a demo to students on using an automated attacker and showing the defenses that can prevent this, or also for research as well, for us to be able to begin to emulate those attackers. As I talked about in the beginning, we want to be able to emulate the entire chain. While Caldera can't do that, our research is still ongoing, in a sense that we're looking at using Caldera in combination with other tools such as Metasploit in order to fully emulate those attackers and their attacks. Thank you so much.
We can take a question. There's a question from us.
Did you measure the signature that was left behind, like people knowing that the exfiltration or the identity management side of the signature, like how was the measurement that someone would be able to detect that it was Caldera versus something else?
Absolutely. So we actually went through, we used Caldera for quite a bit, ran a few different experiments, and we looked at both the source code side and what exactly each ability was doing. But then also we took a look at the victim machine to see how exactly was it covering up those logs. And we found it to be overall pretty successful. There was some issues with some of the abilities, but overall the techniques that they were using, and especially looking at the source code, it covered up those tracks that it was using.
Okay. Yes. Go ahead.
Earlier on the slides, you mentioned that Caldera is good at stealthy Windows access. Can you provide any insight to Linux or that capabilities there?
Absolutely, yeah. So I wasn't able to put on the slides just due to time and constraints. But further in the paper, we actually look at the distribution of those abilities among the different operating systems. And so probably, I believe it was about 85% of the abilities were Windows-based, while the rest were Linux and other operating systems.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.